We're familiar with the fact that Chamishasa B'Av is a very special day. The Mishnah tells us on this day the girls of Yerushalayim would go out and dance in the fields, and we know that there were various categories of girls. We're going to see the Rebbe says that there is a difference how the Mishnah and how the Gemara, both in Bavli and Yerushalmi, tell us the story, which also is illustrative of the different roles that each of these texts plays, and a fascinating insight into the value of those girls who appeared to have nothing valuable to bring to the table. Mishnah sagt with Sima Masech Tainis. The Mishnah famously tells us at the end of Tainis. This is also a Sima Masech Tainis. Lo Yehoyu Yomim Tevim L'Yisok Chamisha B'Av Chagei Kipurim. There were no greater, more festive days in the Jewish calendar than the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur. Shebehen Chulav Neis Yerushalayim. That part of what happened, certainly on the 15th of Av, is that the daughters of Yerushalayim, V'yesh Goysin B'Nois Yisrael, or another version is that all the girls throughout Israel, Yoitzes V'Chedes B'Chrabim. They would go out and they would dance in the vineyards. What would they say at the time? They would address the potential suitors and say, raise your eyes and see what you're going to choose for yourself, obviously as a life's partner. Don't focus your eyes on physical beauty. Look at the value of the family. And then that quote from Shlomo HaMelech, how grace is false and beauty is meaningless. Isha yiras Hashem tisalol, but the woman who fears Hashem, that's who you should praise. Ve'omer, and the pasuk also says, Tnu lami pri yodevi halu b'shar maseho, give her the product of your hand, and she will be praised at the gates. Her deeds will be praised at the gates. V'chein omer, and they also quoted the pasuk that says, Tzeno ure'ena b'nois Tzion, go out and see the daughters of Tzion. B'melech Shlomo, go out and see Shlomo HaMelech. Ba'torah she'itra lo imoy, with the crown that his mother crowned him with, b'yom chasinos, on the day of his wedding, of a yom simchas liboy, and the day of the rejoicing of his heart. The day of his wedding, that refers to the time of the giving of the Torah, specifically as Rashi tells us, Yom Kippurim, that it actually specifically refers to Yom Kippur, which is one of these major festive days in the Jewish calendar, when we were given the second Luchos, which really consolidates the Torah. Yom Simchas Libo, in the day of the rejoicing of Shlomo HaMelech's heart, is Zeh Binyan Beis HaMikdash, the day that the Beis HaMikdash was built. Shenischanach b'Yom Kippurim. And the significance of that linking to Yom Kippur is Yom Kippur was the inauguration of the Beis HaMikdash, as Rashi says, commenting on the Rif, and as the Bartanura says as well. She'yabone b'mheira v'yomeinu, says the Mishnah, may the Beis HaMikdash be speedily rebuilt in our days. Then there's a Gemara commenting on this Mishnah, which generally introduces the idea of the girls going out looking for Shidduchim on Chamishas B'Av, and continues as in the Menosis Yerushalayim or Yisrael, that out of the girls who either from the city of Yerushalayim or the whole Jewish community, they had various types of families, and they each made a different presentation. Says the Brisa, those who were attractive, those who were beautiful. What did they say? Pay attention to beauty, because you marry somebody, a woman brings beauty to the family. Those who came from illustrious families, what would they say? Look at the family we come from, because you marry a woman in order to have children, and you can identify what kind of children you'll have based on the family she comes from. The unattractive amongst them, what did they say? You marry for the sake of heaven, don't look for externalities. Like the Girsin and Yaakov, so that's in the Gemara, that Yaakov in its Girsa brings a fourth possible category. Before the category of those who had nothing to bring to the table. And they say, Yaakov says, that the wealthy ones would say, look at the families that have money. That's the Gemara, the Bavli. Now the Yerushalmi also gives categories of girls from Yerushalayim who went out to dance, but strangely only two categories. There's a difference between the Yerushalmi and the Bavli. Unlike the Gemara that gave three groups of girls, or the Ein Yaakov that introduced a fourth, the Talmud Yerushalmi only gives two options of the groups of girls. Ha-ke'urois, which is kamei ke'urois. The Carbon Aida, which is a commentary on the Yerushalmi, says that the word Kurais, even though spelled differently with an Aleph, is similar to the Chu'urais, which were mentioned in the Talmud Bavli, those who are unattractive. So Hayoymes, they would say, Al titeineinecha benoi, don't pay attention to beauty. Vehanois, and those who were attractive, Hayoymes teineinecha b'mishpacha, they would say, pay attention to the family. So Dafim Pashtem, we have to understand, is Yodur de Klal, as is Nitshayach ken Prukta ina Metzias. It's a very obvious rule, which is you cannot debate a reality. Either it was one or the other. Is fun verstandig. As a cholalme sein inzwischen the Benois Yisraelim ayotis v'emres v'chole. Therefore, the fact has to be according to all views, including the Yerushalmi, that the groups of girls who went out to dance in the fields or in the orchard, in the vineyards, is so weren't only divided into those who were attractive and those who were unattractive. There must have been those who came from illustrious families and those who were wealthy. In Yerushalmi, why does the Yerushalmi not include those in its description? That's our first question. Then we're going to also pay attention to the different language between the Yerushalmi and the Bavli. In the Gemara, the Talmud Bavli, it speaks of them as being beautiful, and in Yerushalmi, noise, whereas the Yerushalmi uses a more generic expression, which you and I might translate as beautiful. We're going to call it attractive, which could apply to various things that are attractive about a person. Besides that, let's have a look at the Yerushalmi in more detail. In Yerushalmi Gufa, Zanin Verstandig Kame Pratim, Umehem, there are a few questions that we have to analyze about how the Yerushalmi has presented this story. Number one, Aleph. Das, was die Keres haben gesagt, those who were unattractive said, don't look at beauty. Okay, we get that. It's doch bloß, but that's just only telling us what not to look for. Was man soll nicht kleiben, what a person should not base their choice on. But surely, if here's a girl who's trying to present herself, make herself a viable shidduch for somebody, surely she shouldn't only say, don't pay attention to that. So she hat gedacht, reden, was soll hier kleiben? He should have told her, okay, pay attention to this. Here's something I can offer you. Like those who are attractive and yet say, pay attention to the family. Und wenn man sagt, as in Bavli steht, as haben wir gesagt, look at how the Gemara in the Talmud Bavli put it. Those who were unattractive said, well, what you should be focused on is that you marry for the sake of heaven. In other words, look at our good deeds, because that will tell you that there's value, there's virtue over here. Yet in the Yerushalmi, it's only the negative. Don't focus on beauty. Die to me is noch größer. What makes this question greater is, was für ein Ort hat es, als die Kiura soll machrit sein, how is it appropriate for a person who is perhaps not attractive to say, don't pay attention to that which is attractive? That's basically saying, we're highlighting the fact that we're not attractive. That's why we're saying, don't pay attention to the fact that we're attractive. As they say, thou protesteth too much. Base. Was der Keshet zwischen Nois und Mishpacha? In the second example, the second group, the Yerushalmi says those who were attractive said, look at the family. Then from Mishpacha is doch a Meile von Yichus. Family is about lineage. As the Talmud Bavli put it, that those who came from special families, they said, pay attention to the legacy of our family. What's the link between being attractive and paying attention to the family you come from? So some of the Mefarshim want to answer as Vibal B'nai Yisrael Mitzad Atzmo no saying that the reality is that all Jewish girls are beautiful. And it's just that because of their financial difficulties, it sometimes degrades their natural beauty. So therefore you can assume that people who do appear physically beautiful must come from families with money, because it's poverty that removes a person's natural beauty. But that's a very difficult explanation to accept. Because if the argument is she's beautiful because her family has money, then why does she have to say, pay attention to the family? Because they bring an araya as if to prove that she's attractive. She could just say simply, look, I'm attractive. Also, Gimel in Yerushalmi is a makdim dem sug from Kuras, fardi noise. How come in Yerushalmi does it first tell us about those who had nothing to bring to the table, or at least nothing physical, before those who had physical attractiveness? Isn't it more logical to present them in order of how prestigious they are or how great they are? Like the Gemara does in Talmud Bavli, where those who are unattractive are mentioned last, because that is logical, it makes sense. Those who have what to bring to the table should obviously present themselves first. Now, we're not finished with the Yerushalmi. We just so far have identified that the Yerushalmi presents only two groups of girls, unlike the Bavli, but then the Yerushalmi adds more. The Yerushalmi continues, and this becomes the siyum of that Gemara. That's pretty much what the Mishnah already said, right? was in dem ist nicht verstandig, that doesn't really seem to make sense. Why is the Yerushalmi telling us this? Aleph, die Reihe von Pasuk 10 Rena Gomer wird schon gebracht in der Mishnah. The fact that there is a Pasuk 10 Rena, which tells us that Yom Kippur is the special day of connection to Hashem, we know this already from the Mishnah. The Gemara doesn't have to tell us. Was it the Gemara Mechadesh? Oif HaMeferish Mishnah. What's the Gemara adding that we didn't already see clearly in the Mishnah? Noch mehr, furthermore, in the Mishnah kommt der Pasuk 10 when the Mishnah quoted this Pasuk about going out and seeing the daughters of Zion, or they going out to see. The Mishnah is bringing that to say, look, the girls went out, they went out on that special day, and they made these circles of dance in the vineyards. So it makes sense that the pasuk fits in the Mishnah, which is telling us the girls went out. But the Gemara is telling us what kind of girls they were. What's the pasuk got to do with that? The Gemara is not describing that they went into the fields or when they went into the fields. Now, it's only saying, it's only describing what they said when they were in the fields. So what's the pasuk linked? How's the pasuk linked to that part of the Gemara? Base also, if you go with the syntax of the Yerushalmi, that in the Mishnah need gebracht the pasuk b'shleimusay. The pasuk is incomplete. The Werte about Torah Shishler imay werden nicht netag, ze werden nur nirmasin mit v'goymer. The words that about the crown that his mother gave him, Shlomo HaMelech, is only alluded to with an etc. It's not stated clearly in the Mishnah that the Yerushalmi quotes. Whereas those words are included in the Gemara. So how come in the Nusach of the Talmud Yerushalmi are those words left out in the Mishnah and included in the Gemara? And the last question is Gimel. After it quotes the Mishnah that says that the Beis Hamikdash should be speedily restored, it adds the word Amen. Was in the Mishnah in Yusach Yerushalmi steht das nicht, which is not in the Mishnah. And our question is, my timer, why do we need the Amen when we're asking for the Beis Hamikdash, specifically in the Gemara? So let's explain all of these things that we have raised by introducing first an important perspective. There is one way that you could try and tackle a whole series of questions, and that is to find the logic behind each question or each difference between the Mishnah and the Gemara, or between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi. But it would make much more sense to say that there's a single logical premise that helps put everything into context. And if not one, perhaps two. But there's certain core premises that we have to have in order to put things into perspective. What's the premise here? The premise we have to approach this with is there's a fundamental difference between how the Talmud Bavli and Talmud Yerushalmi operate, and therefore that impacts how they describe things, what their purpose is. Something that the Rebbe has discussed previously. As in Talmud Yerushalmi, we know that Talmud Yerushalmi is much more brief, succinct, and general than Talmud Yerushalmi. Mashenkin in Bavli, than the Bavli. Mashenkin in Bavli, anybody who's learned Talmud Bavli knows that there's a tremendous amount of detail and a tremendous amount of time spent on a particular subject, whereas the Yerushalmi will move through subjects rapidly. And the time of Demba Pashtas is, why is there that big difference between Bavli and Yerushalmi? The process of putting together Talmud Bavli continued for very long after the completion of Talmud Yerushalmi. Warum? The Chibur v'chsimu von Talmud Bavli is given achas shechibur Rabbi Yochanan Gemara Yerushalmis b'kamoi mea shana. Because here we have it. The composing of the Talmud Bavli, as the Rambam tells us, is about 100 years after the Talmud Yerushalmi. Das says as Talmud Bavli is basroi legabei Talmud Yerushalmi. That's important because that gives us a sequence where we understand that the Talmud Bavli is a latter version, or a more recent, in a sense, version of Torah than the Yerushalmi. So if you're later in the chain of tradition, you have more content to unpack and to analyze, and so therefore you have more detail and more analysis. And that's very similar to the distinction between the language of the Mishnah. As we well know, the idea of the Mishnah is to be extremely brief and yet comprise many, many, many topics that are condensed. And that's completely different to the Gemara, which is much more detailed, and again, because it comes later. So in the same way as we accept as an axiom that the Gemara will always be much more detailed and longer and involved than the Mishnah, you can have a similar distinction between Bavli and Yerushalmi. Und das ist eigentlich eine kurze Chelek zwischen dem Talmud Bavli und Yerushalmi b'nei dedan. So let's have that clear as a perspective. You expect the Yerushalmi to be more succinct, expect the Bavli to be more involved and detailed, therefore expect 3 or 4 examples in the Bavli as compared to only 2 examples in Yerushalmi. So in the Mishnah, so let's start with the Mishnah, which is the most concise of all 3 elements. Steht not the klal. The Mishnah will only give us the overall general principle, which is that there were girls who went out on Chamishas above, and they would say certain things. And the general gist of what they said was, that you shouldn't focus on external beauty, you should focus on where the girl comes from family-wise. On the pratim, doesn't get into the details of what they would say. In the pratim, the details of what they would say, which is, a wife is there for beauty, a wife is there for children, shem shamayim, etc., that's in the Gemara from Bnei Yisrael, where the Gemara unpacks the various categories of girls that were out there on Chamishas above. In them, then when you get into that detail, you'll see a similar distinction between how the Yerushalmi versus the Bavli describes that detail. In Yerushalmi, the Yerushalmi, which is more generic than the Bavli, so the Yerushalmi is going to identify the 2 major categories of girls that you'll have out on Chamishas above. Whereas the Talmud Bavli will take those 2 major categories and unpack them even further, resulting in either 3 or in the Ein Yaakov 4 subcategories, or complete categories in total. That will also explain not only the difference between how much information is shared, but also the kind of language that is used in the Bavli and Yerushalmi. In Bavli, the Bavli is very specific and says that there is physical beauty. Mashenk in Yerushalmi is the Lashon Nois, whereas the Yerushalmi is more generic and uses the word attractive. What's the difference? When you use the word yoifi, you're referring to physical beauty, the person's physical appearance. Mashenken noi is kloli, whereas if you're saying that somebody is attractive, that could be very broad. It could apply not only to physical appearance, but to various values and characteristics that a person has, some of which might be material, some of which might be spiritual. And that's a chilek between Yerushalmi and Bavli. And there you see the distinction between the Yerushalmi, which is speaking in broad strokes, and the Bavli, which is being very specific. The Yerushalmi says there are 2 general groups of girls that were there on Chamishas above. Those who have some kind of a virtue, could be beauty, could be yichus, etc. And those who don't. Mashenkin in Bavli is a machalitim sug for noise gufa in dai protim, whereas the Bavli says, what's attractive about a girl? 3 possible things that are attractive if you include the Ein Yaakov, right? Noise mitzad yofi hagufa aponim yefefia. Some are physically attractive. Noise mitzad yichus miyuchosis. Some are attractive because they come from beautiful families. On like Girsa so Ein Yaakov noise mitzad them was his nashiris, and some are attractive because they come from wealthy families. The Shleimer as in them is the nitazoi. And in that particular category of those who are attracted because their daddy has money, it's not because money is a virtue in Judaism, nor as because, as we said before, that a person who is poor, sometimes it interferes with their natural beauty. So the greatness of the person from the wealthy family is that it allows the beauty to shine through. As we well know, the Gemara tells us that when a person lives in a beautiful home and has beautiful assets, it helps broaden their mind. So it's actually good for the person all around, and these girls have that virtue. So now we've got it. The Mishnah is the absolute klal. The Yerushalmi gives us 2 klalim about what kind of girls we're looking for, and the Bavli unpacks it. But that does, however, raise the question we asked before about the Yerushalmi. Yes, the word nois could also, as one of its subcategories, include coming from a dignified family. But it also includes physical beauty as well as wealth. Why are the girls in the category of no'ois specifically saying pay attention to the family? So Habir Bozeh, the explanation for that is this is really important. Whatever we're listing over here are not traits of the girl's own doing, not something she achieved. All the things in the no'ois category are inherited or received virtues. Obviously, the yichus of a person's family is not something they create, it's something that they inherit. Ashiras, if they have wealth, what's wealth in the context of a good Jewish woman, particularly a girl who belongs to Yerushalayim, which is a symbol of absolute Yiras Hashem? Such a girl is very modest, and she's not out there in the business in the workplace. She's not out there trying to earn a living. Especially before she's married, and that's who we're talking about, girls who are looking to get married. Therefore, automatically, if she's wealthy because of her family. And the same applies to physical beauty. It's not something you choose. No, in it's part of your genes. First of all, the parents have to be able to provide so that they don't have the problem of being impoverished, which interferes with beauty. So that's the parent's gift to the child. And besides that, it's durch the Ashirus von the Eltern, and that's obviously thanks to the parents that they have wealth. And of course, the genetics themselves, as we well know, that the Gemara talks about the idea that people inherit their appearance from their parents. So now we've got an insight as in the Bavli and Yerushalmi. That illustrates to us that there is a fundamental difference in what the messaging was, according to the Bavli or the Yerushalmi, shared by those girls who fall into the attractive categories. The Bavli's attitude is as jeder Sug hat gebracht sein Meile, that each subcategory of the category of attractive girls had to highlight what they bring to the table, what is attractive about them. Pay attention to beauty, to family. According to the Yaakov, pay attention to the bank balance. In other words, the Babli is pretty much saying that they're saying, look at what traits I bring with me, what assets I bring to the table. Even those who are saying, pay attention to my family, is it doch nicht aus in der Meile von der Mishpacha in allgemeine, das, was sie, als a Teil von der Mishpacha, vermogt die Meile von Yichus. When a person says, pay attention to my family, they're not trying to say, I have a wonderful family. They're saying, I am a special person because I belong to such a special family. So in other words, the Babli puts their propositions as, look at me because of what I have been endowed with. Mashenkin Yerushalmi is the Techno Amir from the No'os, whereas the Yerushalmi looks at a completely different target. The Yerushalmi is saying, why are we attractive? As man soll gucken, if there's sibes amadis, because of something that allowed me to be attractive. As it's not something I achieved, all the noise are saying, look at the family, what it's given me. So that major distinction where the Bavli is saying that their script says, I am special because I have assets, versus the Yerushalmi which is saying, I was given something which is special, that comes back to the core difference between how Bavli and Yerushalmi learns. The Chelek, in unserer Sugya zwischen Bavli and Yerushalmi, the distinction between how Bavli and Yerushalmi analyze our topic, is not nur was the Bavli is memorized with Yerushalmi. It's not just a matter of detail, that the Bavli gives more detail than Yerushalmi. But these are two completely different approaches to how you unpack the Mishnah, because both Gemaras have the role of unpacking the Mishnah. Yerushalmi, from that perspective, is in Gemara Mishnah. The Gemara is not adding any new information the Mishnah did not already tell us. The Yerushalmi is based for it, as das was steht in the Mishnah. All the Yerushalmi is doing is identifying when the Mishnah said, as even that the girls of Yerushalayim would say, don't pay attention to attractiveness, but rather pay attention to family. The Mishnah is actually telling us two different things. From from two different kinds of families. Those who had no attractive elements, they would say, don't pay attention to that which is attractive. And those who did have attractive elements would say, but realize those come from my family, and I am fortunate to have these brachas. And the mit is fine for Pashas was Yerushalmi is makdim to kurz to the noise, which, by the way, resolves for us why the Yerushalmi first mentions those who are unattractive before those who are attractive. But das is behesem to sidra b'mishnah, because it's effectively analyzing how the Mishnah presented it. Because the Mishnah first said, don't pay attention to that which is physical and attractive. And then the Mishnah said, focus on the family. So therefore, the Gemara mirrored that and presented it in the same way. Mashenkin the Bavli is Moisef naye prota midus was ver nit the mont beferish in Mishnah, whereas the Bavli is adding new statements that these girls may have made that the Mishnah hadn't even said. In andere Werte, the Mishnah erzählt wegen der Amira Klolis. In other words, we could say the Mishnah is telling us broadly that there were girls making announcements. And all of the announcements of all of the girls of Yerushalayim were effectively the same premise, which is Bachur, raise your eyes and see what you're going to choose. That's what the Mishnah told us. Then the Gemara in Yerushalmi is mefer. Then the Gemara in Yerushalmi says, okay, let's unpack. What exactly were they saying? Yes, it's true that across the spectrum, every single girl who was out there in Chamisha B'Av had the same introductory note, raise your eyes and look what you're going to choose. But the Yerushalmi says, the Mishnah said other things as well, which we have to unpack. Don't pay attention to that which appears attractive, but rather focus on the family. Says the Yerushalmi, that's not a single sentence. That is a summary of two different classes of girls who had two different approaches to their self-marketing, if you wish. Those who had nothing attractive said, don't focus on what looks attractive. And all of those who have various types of attraction, beauty, family, money, would say, look at the family I come from, I'm so gifted to have these brachas. And if them is the Gemara in Bavli Moisef, and then the Bavli expands it further and says, yes, that's true. There was a broad-based statement that the Mishnah has already described, and the broad categories that the Yerushalmi told us. Over and above that, each particular group also had a very specific element that they would share. In the category of noise, attractive girls, there are various types of attractive girls, and they would spell it out for the prospective bachrim. As in Yerushalmi's the Amira von die Noise, dieselbe Amira was steht in Mishnah. So now coming from this perspective, we now understand that what the Yerushalmi told us is effectively saying the same words as the Mishnah, just clarifying what the Mishnah meant. That would explain why those who were attractive said, they didn't say pay attention to the specific value that I bring. Now, but a broader message. Look at the family that gave me these milas. The explanation is this. In the Mishnah. Let's remember what was the goal and objective of what the Mishnah was telling us about the girl's statement. Is samadish zayin as the Yisraelim, the Herren v'Alamayis was a famogen. So the Yerushalmi is reminding us that the Mishnah wanted to convey that these girls were saying whatever greatness they have is just nit zera mailis is not their doing. They don't walk around with some kind of arrogance to say, I have made myself beautiful, I have made myself miyucheses, I have made myself wealthy. They acknowledge humbly that it's something that they were gifted with. To put it from the angle and perspective of Muslim Chassidus, they know that they're about to have a shidduch, and in order for a shidduch to succeed, the bacher, if he wants to have a successful shidduch, should not be focused on whatever value he will get out of this transaction, whether it is material or even spiritual. No mehavaya isha maskeles, as the pasuk says. It's the Eibish's choice how we land up getting a wife, and therefore mispalon mechavzan if he's climbing the richtigen shidduch. Therefore, the bacher has to daven and focus to choose the correct shidduch. The one that was predestined before the person came into this world, that so and so will marry so and so. Interesting. It says bas ploini, right? Which implies obviously that it's not her greatness, the greatness of where she comes from. Therefore, the introduction across the board of all these girls to the boys was, raise your eyes to see what you're going to choose. They're telling the Bachrim, look out for the traits and values and virtues of these girls, whether they be material or spiritual. Not through the lenses of how we see life here on earth. Now, fear das sein so einecha. First, you got to raise your perspective, and then you can see what you're looking for. Like the pasuk tells us, raise your eyes in order to see who created everything. You have to pay attention, raise your eyes to see the source from where all of these virtues came. They don't manifest just simply out of thin air, nor from a person's personal investment. When you look from a higher perspective, with a more mature outlook as to what marriage is about, then you won't be looking at that which is attractive, but rather the family that it comes from. Because you'll recognize that the milas that this individual girl has is because of the family who brought her up in a particular way or gifted her with certain things. On Demmelt, wird sicher sein zu Mechaven sein, zu dem Shidduch, welchen man hat Machers given b'morim. With that appropriate perspective, the person will be able to align with the kind of Shidduch that the Eibishter had in mind for them. Was means Macher is Bas Ploini Lifloini, or nicht Ploinis Lifloini, where the emphasis is so-and-so's daughter rather than emphasizing her individual identity. The Irke Adgoshi is nicht in der Kala, no mishpachas ava kala. So there you have it, that the emphasis is not on the girl herself, but rather the family she came from, and that obviously built her and infused her with all of these midas that she has. Now we can go back to one of our big questions, which was, why does the Yerushalmi say that the unattractive girls had nothing to offer? They just said what you should not look at. They only focus on the negative. It's because all of the girls, including those who were unattractive, they began the process by focusing the eyes and attention and mindset of the Bachrim. Raise your eyes to see what you're going to choose. Even those who appear unattractive make that introductory message. Why? Because what they're saying is, maybe we don't have virtues that you are able to see with physical lenses. But you got to look beyond what appears physically. Where do we come from? Even the so-called less attractive young girls. That every single Jewish girl is a daughter of the greatest, most pious women in history. Even more than that. And here's an incredible concept. As Adrabah, in dem inyan, believe it or not, the one who appears less attractive in this particular area, this lesson in life, which is that you approach a shidduch by raising your perspective and looking from Hashem's vantage point rather than just personal interest, to zen hecher, to see things in a high way, is something which expresses itself more in the unattractive girl than in the attractive girl. How so? The Bir Bozeh. Forschung seine mir vor, als das, was die Mechayer sagen, wie steht in Bavli, Ku Mekhlem Shum Shamayim. Says the Bavli told us, those who are unattractive, say to the Bacher, marry for the sake of heaven. It's weil sie haben Yiras Hashem. Why did they say that? Because that's their reality. They actually live with Yiras Hashem. Wie der Pasuk was bringt sich in Mishnah Nuschas HaBavli, Yisha Yiras Hashem Mitisala, like the Mishnah said, at least in the Bavli's version of the Mishnah, which is that you praise a woman who fears the Eibishter. And yet people who have Yiras Hashem, the Gemara is calling them unattractive, which mechoaris means even more than unattractive. How could you say that? Shlomo Pirish Bozeh explanation is, those who are the unattractive girls because they have none of those virtues which are so apparent, yoifi, beauty, yichus, family, or their ashirus, wealth, as we've mentioned, which are all inherited traits. Is a Yiras Hashem mitzad atzmon. Yiras Hashem you cannot inherit. Yiras Hashem is an achievement. Because we're dealing over here with a young Jewish person who is wired to not want to do anything across from what the Eibishter wants and to completely dedicate to what Hashem wants. And therefore they're conscious of the fact that why do I have Yiras Hashem? Not because I come from a beautiful family, not because I have wealth, not because I have beauty, but because I have a spark of Eibishter in me. And the Eibishter is the one who grants us power, success, etc. But they look at themselves and say, I am unattractive in and of myself. That, like the moon, which the Gemara in Sukkah tells us, we don't only follow the moon for the calendar, but we're comparable to the moon. The moon has nothing intrinsic to offer. The light generated by the moon is not its light. It's a reflection of sunlight. And that makes the moon admittedly a minor luminary compared to the sun, but it's also a major luminary in the night sky compared to all the stars. That's the big difference between the unattractive and attractive girls. Those girls who are attractive, it means that they're conscious of, they feel the greatness, they feel that they're beautiful, they feel that they come from a special family, they feel that they have money. But realistically, these are not arrogant people, these are girls of Yerushalayim, they have tznius. They're humble enough to know, I didn't do this. The midas that I have, I inherited it. They're a gift. Look at my family and you'll appreciate where I come from. But there's no contradiction here. It's not because a girl says, I come from a family with good genes, that she doesn't feel beautiful. She knows she's beautiful. She doesn't say, I'm not wealthy. She knows she's wealthy. She's part of that family. Whereas the girls who are unattractive feel, I have nothing, not even something passed down through the generation. Whatever is in my life is directly from Hashem. That's an incredibly advanced spiritual space to be in. And therefore the Keuros are people who their headspace is, even if they had virtues, even if they had beauty or yichus or wealth, they would never see it as something which is theirs. And therefore they don't even say whatever value they have in their life is because of their families. Which could make a person feel quite quite conscious of self. In other words, I know that I have miles, I'm part of a great family. Rather, their entire attitude to shidduchim is raise your eyes. As a result, always look at where things come from. Always look at the original source. Always focus on the Eibishter. Don't get caught up in the virtues. That's the Pirish was that's why it's in the negative. Even if there is noi, even where there are virtues, don't focus on the virtue. Don't focus on the visible. Focus on the source from where it comes. Focus on the Eibishter. That's their message. Very powerful message. Now we can go back to why the Yerushalmi included the pasuk, which is already in the Mishnah. Because the Gemara, remember, is expanding the general statement of the Mishnah into two groups, the attractive and non-attractive girls, and wants to bring a pasuk to link to that, Keuros and Nois. And the Faras Yerushalmi do Moisef ala Mishnah, and that's why the Yerushalmi adds more words from the pasuk. In Mishnah, the crown that was given by the mother, the Mishnah didn't include that. The Mishnah in the Yerushalmi's version just put an etc. Why? What's going on over here? So the Birba said we're going to split this pasuk into two things. The pasuk that pasuk is describing two virtues of Shlomo HaMelech. Aleph, the crown his mother gave him. Beis, and the day of his marriage and his simcha, which the Gemara says is a binyan Beis Hamikdash for Shlomo had geboit. That's the time of the building of the Beis Hamikdash that Shlomo HaMelech built. Actually, the Mishnah said it. What's the difference? The Chelek division to Tzvei Mailis is a crown is a symbol of personal greatness. Not just anybody becomes a king. As an edus, if Arona Malchus based David, is when Ateres David hon wasai. The Gemara says, interestingly, how do you know that somebody deserves to be part of the great golden lineage of David HaMelech if the crown fits their head properly? In other words, the person has to have the traits to be a king, and then they become a king. It speaks about our virtues. But like the girls with virtues who say, look at the family, according to the Yerushalmi, because that's who we're discussing now, look at the family, it's to say, I have milas, but I don't take the claim for them, they come from my mother. He is suitable to be a king, he has the right qualities to be a king, but it is an inherited set of virtues. Exactly like the Yerushalmi described, the girls with who are attractive say, look at the family. So they have greatness, but it's not of their own doing, it's passed down as a gift from the family. But building the Beis HaMikdash hat das Shlomo gebaut. Shlomo built the Beis HaMikdash. It wasn't a gift, it wasn't an inheritance. But how did he build the Beis HaMikdash? As the pasuk says, everything that he did was completely directed by the Eibishter. Das is Beis Hashem. It's the Eibishter's house, not his. Okay, for the Shlomo Melech davened at the opening of the Beis HaMikdash, Shimcha Nikra ala Beis Hazeh Asher Bo Nisi. Your name should be called on this house. It shouldn't be referred to as Solomon's temple, even though that's a very contemporary thing. It should be referred to as the Eibishter's home. But that's similar to the so-called unattractive girls. They're the ones that say, you know what's great? Fear of the Eibishter. And if I have that trait, that I have Yiras Hashem, it's not me, it's not my asset, it's not my virtue, it's the Eibishter's gift to me. And that's why the Yerushalmi added to Sheibone Beis HaMikdash the word Amen. Sheibone Beis HaMikdash Meheir v'Yameinu Amen. But the Shaykhs and Zebin Beis HaMikdash to the Kiuros, because now we're linking Shlomo HaMelech building the Beis HaMikdash to the girls who are so-called unattractive, but now we know have this tremendous Yiras Hashem. The word Amen actually highlights what their value and virtue is. Amen is Mileshoin Emes. The whole meaning and purpose of Amen is to ratify. I agree with what you've said. I ratify what you've said. It's true. Therefore, the intention we're supposed to have when we say Amen to a bracha or to a request that we have is that it should come true. As we well know, true emes means something which is unwavering. It's always consistent across all scenarios. The Sof Sheibone B'Meheir v'Yameinu is Moisef und sagt, dass Sheibone B'Meheir v'Yameinu Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi v'Tzayin HaBinyan Nitzchi. By adding the word Amen, which is the message of Emes, to our prayers for the Beis HaMikdash, we're specifying that this Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi will be, as we know it will, an eternal Beis HaMikdash. Why will it be eternal? The time was Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi v'Tzayin HaBinyan Nitzchi is as the far was Mikdash Adnai Keinu Yodecha. The reason the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi is indestructible is because it's the Eibishter's Beis HaMikdash. Das is binyana de kutsha brichu. It's not a human endeavor. It's not our success. It's the Eibishter's Beis HaMikdash. And das sagt der Yerushalmi. As the Meide von Binyan Beis HaMikdash was his Beis Hashem. Therefore the Yerushalmi, speaking about the greatness of the Beis HaMikdash, which is Hashem's home, as Shlomo HaMelech originally called it. But the Meide von Tekiuras was der Herrn as als kommt von dem was bara eile, which is, as we've linked, the perspective of the Kurah is that everything is the Eibishter's doing. You know, you'll see that for real, tangibly in the third Beis HaMikdash, where you'll see it's the Eibishter's Beis HaMikdash, and therefore it will last forever. And we can link this also to how the Bavli concludes the Gemara. Where the Gemara there describes that in the future the Eibush is going to make this big circle, this big joyous circle for the tzaddikim, and he's going to be between them. You could easily say, okay, we get it. The Gemara is concluding with the story of the Eibush, so to speak, making this circle for the tzaddikim, because we're talking about in the Mishnah girls dancing in a circle. It's way beyond that. No, that concept of the Beis HaMikdash being speedily rebuilt, as the Mishnah says, as in the Zman von Yosef Shibon B'Meheir v'Yameinu, means that at that time, in the future, when the Beis HaMikdash is built, not only will it be a time of tremendous simcha, which obviously we anticipate, Yom Simchas Liba is a binyan Beis Hamikdash, or as the pasuk says, the construction of the Beis Hamikdash is a time of tremendous simcha. Now, euch der Eifen simcha wird sein, but the kind of simcha will be as also the Hakadosh Baruch Hu last is mochol litzadikim chulei. It will be a simcha represented by a circle, a joyous circle, like a circle of dance. Was euch in dem sagt man dem Chiluk zwischen Eifen Limud Ababli and Yerushalmi, which again illustrates the distinctive approaches to learning that you see in Yerushalmi versus Babli. Die Gemara in Yerushalmi is placed before the Mishnah says she bim heve ameinu v'tzayin Eifen von Amen. The Gemara says in Yerushalmi, the Beis Hamikdash will be emes, amen, it will be forever. You'll see that it's the Eibishter's Beis Hamikdash. But again, the methodology of the Bavli is to unpack further detail that the Yerushalmi wouldn't necessarily drill down to. So he has more detail about what's going to happen in the future at the time of the Beis Hamikdash. Also, the Kodesh Baruch Hu, that the Eibishter is going to make a gathering for the tzaddikim, which is a big, beautiful circle. And he's going to sit between them, and it will happen in Gan Eden, much more detail. And everybody will have such clarity of the Eibishter's revelation that they'll be able to point with their fingers and say, this is the Eibishter we looked forward to, and we were waiting for, and he has now saved us. This is the Eibishter who redeemed us, and we will celebrate that redemption. Mitzvah Hashem should be able to do so right now, as the Bavli does in all of its details. Teikev umiyad mamish.